behind the lamp and you can see a small white cat. You'll see lots of these cats all over the city's buildings. Originally put there as good luck charms in Victorian times, later they became a trademark of a local architect called Tom Adams. These cats have become a feature all over the city. On the right, you can see some of the buildings have bricked up windows on the first floor. This comes from the Georgian window tax. In 1696, a law was passed on which owners were taxed on the amount of windows their property had. To avoid paying this tax, windows were bricked up. These days, when something is expensive, you'll hear people say, "That's daylight robbery." It is possible this saying comes from the old tax. You either paid up or lost your daylight, hence daylight robbery. Looking ahead on the corner, it became the College of Ripon York St John before being granted university status in 2006, and it has around 6,000 students. It is one of two universities, the other being York University. This is situated on the eastern outskirts of the city and opened in 1963. It boasts over 15,000 students and is regularly voted into the top 15 universities in the country. Mayor's Walk, look to the right and we will get a nice view along the city walls. You can still see the defensive moat at the foot of the walls. This once would have been full of filthy water and rotting waste. Behind the wall, to the right, you can see York Minster, or to give it its proper title, the Cathedral and Metropolitical Church of St Peter in York. It is both a minster and a cathedral. The name Minster derives from the Latin monasterium. From here, the local monks would go out to teach or minister. It is also a cathedral because it contains the throne of a bishop. This is taken from the Latin cathedra and means seat. In York's case, the seat of an archbishop. The present York Minster is the fifth church to be on this site. Keep looking on your right, and as we turn, you will see Monk Bar, which is the tallest of York's gateways, standing at 63 feet, or 19.2 meters in height. On the top stand life-size stone figures known as the Wild Men of York. Legend says they will come alive and throw their boulders down onto anybody daring enough to attack the city. Monk Bar has the only working portcullis on any of York's gateways. A portcullis is a big gate that can be lowered when the city is under threat. The last time it was lowered was in 1953 to celebrate the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. The gate came down brilliantly, but got stuck when it dug into the road below. It took days to raise it back up, so it's never been dropped down since. We still claim it works though. If we were to follow the road ahead of us across the roundabout for about 10 miles, we would come to Castle Howard, a stately home dating back to about 1700. Castle Howard is where the period drama Brideshead Revisited was filmed. With its elegant house, beautiful gardens and lake, it is well worth a visit. We are moving into Foss Bank and running alongside York's second river, the Foss, on our left. It probably gets its name from the Latin word fossa, which means ditch or stream. There is no longer any commercial river traffic on the Foss, which was made into a canal in 1792. Today, both the Ouse and the Foss are mainly used by pleasure boats and wildlife. Looking to the right is Sainsbury's supermarket. In the 1980s, when this was being built, workmen unearthed hundreds of skeletons here. Work was stopped, and an investigation found this site to be the largest Jewish burial site outside of London, dating back to 1177. The chief rabbi was called in, the land was consecrated and declared sacred, and the bodies were left in peace. This area is known as Jewry, which means Jewish borough or town. If you look to your right, you will see that the city walls come to an end. That's because a wall was not needed at this side of the city due to the King's fish pool, which formed a man-made of the city's rubbish. It was closed some years ago. The chimney itself has been preserved due to the fact it still has camouflage paint on it, dating back to the Zeppelin raids of the First World War. If you look to the left, there is a 15th century timber-framed house, now the Black Swan pub. The Black Swan claims to be one of the most haunted pubs in York, but to be fair, most pubs in York claim to be either the most haunted or the oldest. It does have some rather intriguing ghosts in there though. It has a grumpy old man who sits at the bar, but nobody ever buys him a drink. A young lady sits looking into the fire, but nobody has ever seen her face. And a pair of legs which run around, bringing a whole new meaning to the phrase, getting legless in a pub. This brings us into Stonebourne. This is our nearest stop for York's most famous street, the Shambles, the medieval cobbled street of the butchers, the market, the city centre shops, and the merchant adventurers' hall. Please alight here for any of these places. Looking ahead, we can see the small church hall of St Crux. Just in front of St Crux on the right is York's shortest street with the longest name, Whitma Gate. We think it gets its name from a corruption of an old Saxon saying, Whitma, meaning it's neither one thing nor the other. The street only has 3 properties, numbers 1, 1A, and 1.5. It never gets to 2. Just past the church hall of St Crux on the right is the Shambles, York's most photographed street. The Shambles probably gets its name from an old Danish word, fleshamels, which means the street of the butchers. The flesh was the meat, and the shamel was a large window ledge outside the shop where meat would be displayed. Look to the right, and you may get a brief view along the Shambles. At the far end, you can see how the houses nearly touch at the top. It is said that 2 men can lean out of the windows and shake hands across the street. If you heard the shout, Gardez-vous, you would very quickly get under the overhang of the buildings, as Gardez-vous means watch out for the water, and meant that the contents of somebody's chamber pot was about to be deposited on your head. We move into Coppergate. It doesn't get its name from the metal copper as you might think, but from cupra, the Norse word for cup maker. It was when the new Coppergate shopping precinct was being built in the late 1970s and early 1980s that over 40,000 finds from a Viking settlement were so important that it even changed the way we teach about Vikings in the national school curriculum. Today you can see what was found in the Jorvik Viking Centre, where you can travel back in time over 1,000 years in York's history to experience the sights, the sounds and even the smells of Viking York. You can visit the Viking Centre from our next stop, but please remain seated until we arrive at the Clifford's Tower stop. We are now moving into Tower Street and the site of the castle. This is your stop for the Castle Museum, Clifford's Tower, York Boat River Cruises, the Yorvik Viking Centre, York Dungeon, Fairfax House, and St George's Field Coach and Car Park. Tower is on our left. It was part of the castle complex that was built in 1245, but it is not the first castle to stand here. Originally, there were two castles, one either side of the river. They were built by William the Conqueror's men in 1068 and made of wood. William didn't have it all his own way in the north, and a year later the locals burnt down the castle in a rebellion. William was furious and sent his troops to quell the rebellion. He did this in a brutal fashion, an event which is now referred to as the Harrying of the North, where he burnt everything between York and the Newcastle area. Buildings, animals and crops were all destroyed, but he didn't stop there. It is believed he got his troops to salt the soil so nothing could grow. Look at the building on our left. It used to be the Assize Courts. These days, it is the Crown Court. As we pass by, you can see the bars on the cell windows. Those on trial here are still held in the same cells the offenders were held in over 200 years ago. This is due to the building being a Grade 1 listed property, so it cannot be altered inside or out. On the left you can see the last remaining section of the castle wall. Look left as we pass the circular drum tower, and you can see where the drawbridge would have been at the base of the wall. Ahead we can see a square tower marking the end of this section of the city wall. This is Fishergate Postern Tower, which stands where the wall met the River Foss, which would have been much wider than it is today. There were 6 postern towers on the walls of York. Postern means rear entrance, and this is the only such tower still remaining. As we turn into Lead Mills Lane, look to the right. On the wall of the tower, just above peg height, is a stone projection sticking out. This projection is part of a garderobe, which is a medieval toilet chute. The waste would come out of the chute and drop directly into the King's Fish Pool down below. Over the hedge to our left is the graveyard of St George's Church, which has just one upstanding headstone in it. Those on the bottom deck may see this headstone through the gates on the left as we turn. This is the grave of Dick Turpin, the notorious Georgian highwayman who robbed stagecoaches in the 18th century. On the left is St George's Roman Catholic Church, which was built in 1850 for the Irish settlers who arrived in this area during the Irish potato famine. The church replaced an earlier one and was temporarily the Catholic Cathedral of York. It was designed by the architect Joseph Hanson, who also designed the Hansom Cab, a horse-drawn vehicle which was very popular in Victorian times. An example of a Hansom Cab can be seen in the Castle Museum. We move into Walmgate.
Yeah, you're right.
This street was originally called Walbergate, possibly named after a female Viking warrior named Walber. It is one of York's oldest streets, following the line of the ancient Roman road to the east. Straight ahead of us is Walmgate Bar, the most complete gateway on a city wall, not only here in York, but also in the United Kingdom. This is because it still retains its barbican, which is the tunnel-like structure on the outside of the gateway. We will see the barbican when we turn right. You will not see another original Barbican attached to a city wall unless you go to Krakow in Poland. All the others have now gone. As we turn right, look to the right, and you will have a brief view inside the Barbican. Imagine being trapped in there, with the soldiers throwing all kinds of nasty things down from above. In 1828, the city's cattle market was relocated to this area. Cattle and sheep were brought here from all over the country to be traded. The flat grassed areas at the foot of the walls were where livestock were kept in pens awaiting their sale. In 1971, the market was moved again, this time to Merton, a village just outside of York, and was renamed the York Livestock Centre. On our left is the Barbican Leisure Centre, which is named after the Barbican at nearby Fishergate Bar. This is where the UK Snooker Championship has been held many times, and it is also a music and entertainment venue. On our right is Fishergate Bar. This is the smallest of the 5 medieval gateways, first recorded in 1315. The red painted stone above the archway reveals the date of the current bar, which is 1487. 2 years after that date, the gateway was attacked and damaged in the Yorkshire Peasants' Revolt against Henry VII. The rebels burned the gates of the bar after murdering the Earl of Northumberland. The gateway was bricked up soon after and wasn't reopened until 1834 to give better access to the cattle market. Fishergate is the road to Fulford, a village just south of York. This was the site of the Battle of Fulford on the 20th of September 1066, where the Vikings beat the Saxons. The Saxon army then returned the favour at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, just 5 days later. Just 3 weeks later, however, there was a third, more famous battle, the Battle of Hastings, where the Saxons led by Harold Godwinson were defeated by the Normans led by William the Conqueror. Fit in with Old York. He's put a turret shape on it and covered the walls in magnesium limestone, the same stone the minster and the city walls are made of. The idea is that eventually it will blend in with its older surroundings. Look to the left, and you can see in the distance a glass structure above the River Foss. This is York's flood barrier. A barrier is lowered from this structure to stop the River Ouse backing up the River Foss, and this stops the eastern side of the city from flooding. Unless it fails, as it did in such spectacular fashion on Boxing Day 2015. We move on to GillyGate Bridge and cross the River Ouse, York's main river. Look to your right to see Ouse Bridge, the oldest of the bridges built in 1821, replacing various older bridges dating back to Viking times. Look to your right, and you will see the city walls at Bale Hill, a grass mound with trees growing on it. Bale Hill was the site of William the Conqueror's second castle, dating to around 1068. Nothing remains of it, however, because it was only ever made of wood, and nobody wanted to pay for its upkeep. Eventually, it was found to be in such a sad state of repair, it was pulled down. Notice the buildings around become much more modern outside the walls, but don't be fooled. There used to be older buildings outside the city walls, but in 1644, York was under siege for 3 months during the Civil War. Around 30,000 parliamentarian troops surrounded the city. However, it is said it was the royalists defending the city who pulled down the buildings outside the walls to get a better view of those attacking it. Bishopthorpe Road has been named in the Times as one of the top 30 of the coolest places to live in the country. In 2014, the Tour de France Las Vegas house at the top of the hill with a large black door with number 76 on it. Just after it, look in the gap and there is a door with the number 76A on it. This claims to be the smallest house in York. We are now in an area of Victorian and Edwardian York. With the arrival of the railways to York in the 1800s, the city grew rapidly. More houses were needed to accommodate the growing population, which had shot up from 17,000 in 1801 to a staggering 77,000 by 1881. These new suburbs were built outside the city walls, with back-to-back terraces to house the people who had come to York to work on the railways and in the chocolate factories. Once the railways had arrived, York became much easier to get to and quickly became quite a tourist destination for the middle classes. No longer did you have to make the long and dangerous journey down south for entertainment by horse-drawn carriage, and so York soon became the leisure and pleasure capital of the north. In York mainly with the coming of the railways, although chocolate has been made in York since 1700. The two main chocolate makers in York were Terry's, who started making chocolate in 1767, and later Rowntree's, who had opened a grocer's shop in the centre of York in 1822. Road, we pass a modern housing estate known as the Chocolate Works, which gives a clue to what was in this area. Behind the buildings on the left, we can see a brief sight of what remains of the Terry's chocolate factory. Sadly, Terry's no longer makes chocolate here in York. The factory was closed down in 2005 and production was moved elsewhere. Its most famous product, the chocolate orange, is now made in Europe. The chocolate orange has become very much a part of Christmas tradition in this country. A survey has revealed that a Terry's chocolate orange finds its way into 1 in 10 Christmas stockings. Terry's was thought to be the first chocolate manufacturer of an assorted box of chocolates, which of course became known as Terry's All Gold. If you look through the trees on the left at the clock tower, can you spot what's strange about it? It has no numbers on the clock face, just the letters spelling the words Terry York, a reminder of over 200 years of chocolate making in the city. Ahead of us is York Racecourse, the home of horse racing here in York. There has been horse racing in York since Roman times, and racing has taken place on this area of land, known as the Knavesmire, since 1730. The Knavesmire may get its name from a knave, a common servant allowed to use this area for leisure and for grazing animals, and mire, a boggy area of land, which it still is to this day. The Knavesmire wasn't just used for horse racing, but other entertainments also took place here. It was common to see bare-knuckle boxing, bear baiting, and cockfights here. The most popular spectator sport, however, were the hangings, which took place here from 1379 right up until 1801. People would come from far and wide to see villains hang at the Tyburn. The most notorious person to be hanged at the Tyburn was none other than Dick Turpin, the highway robber who was executed here on the 7th of April, 1739. Today, the Knavesmire holds around 15 days of horse racing a year, the highlight of which is the Ebor Festival that takes place in August. York Racecourse also had the honour of hosting Royal Ascot in 2005, whilst the Ascot course was being renovated. In 1982, when the late Pope John Paul II visited the United Kingdom, it was the first time a reigning Pope had visited this country. He came to the racecourse here in York and gave mass to over 200,000 people. The Knavesmire is also used for music concerts, circuses, fairs, and has been the home to the largest beer festival in the north of England on many occasions. On the right, in the middle of the road, is the herdsman's cottage, which looks like something out of a Hansel and Gretel fairy tale. The cottage is where the man who looked after the animals on the Knavesmire would have lived from 1840. Traditionally, if you own the property, you are given the title Keeper of the Stray, although there are no herds of animals grazing on the Knavesmire anymore. As we head back towards the city, we travel up an area of York known as the Mount, possibly due to it being the highest land in the city. The Mount was always one of the more favoured areas to live, even in Roman times. The large buildings around this area date mainly from the Georgian and Victorian periods, and these were once private residences containing many servants. Today, most of the buildings have become hotels, guest houses, and apartments. The Mount follows the line of the old Roman road into the city from the south, which lies to the left of the modern road, just a few feet underground, 4th centuries AD. Archaeologists initially suspected that the skeletons were those of Roman soldiers who were loyal to the Emperor Severus. He died at York in 211 AD, and his ruthless son Caracalla might have had the soldiers killed if they had tried to stop him from seizing power. In 2014, researchers from the York Archaeological Trust, who were leading the investigation, announced tantalizing evidence that the men were possibly gladiators brought to Britain from across the Mediterranean. They would have fought in an amphitheatre which is yet to be found. Looking ahead, you will see GillyGate Bar. This is one of the 4 main gateways into the city of York. GillyGate's name comes from Mickle, meaning Great Street, and it is said to be the front door to York. It is also known as the Royal Entrance, as it is the custom for every monarch who visits York to ask permission of the Lord Mayor to be allowed into the city through this gateway. Every monarch has done this except for 2, Henry VIII, who on his second visit didn't go through the ceremony allowing him into the city, and Queen Victoria. Queen Elizabeth II visited GillyGate Bar during part of her Diamond Jubilee celebrations in 2012. And asked the Lord Mayor for permission to enter. The Lord Mayor, of course, is never going to say, "Not today, ma'am, you can't come in." This is because GillyGate Bar was also known as Traitors' Gate, where the heads of traitors would be chopped off, boiled, rolled in tar, and stuck on a spike on the top, as a warning to those coming into the city. We are now moving into Queen Street. Ahead of us is York's modern railway station, opened in 1877, when it claimed to be the largest railway station in the world. It is no longer the largest, but is still an amazing piece of architecture, having been built on a long curve. The first permanent station was built down to our right inside the walls. The large arches were knocked through the walls to allow the trains into the station in 1841. The trains would go through the arches and then have to sweep left to the old station inside the walls. It wasn't very practical, as once you got the train in there, it then had to be turned around to get back out, and this proved to be problematic. It would have been fine if it was only 1 or 2 trains a day, but York was becoming a very busy station, which soon saw over 300 trains a day coming to York. The new station was built to alleviate this problem in 1877. Other local attractions in York. Please see your leaflet for current offers. For safety, please remain seated when the bus is moving. Please relax and enjoy the tour. The hotel to our left was opened on the 20th of May 1878. In those days, it was simply known as the Royal Station Hotel. In recent years, the hotel has changed to the largest in York, and when we go further along, we can get a truer picture of its size. The importance of the railways to York's more recent history cannot be overstated. By the early 1800s, the city had become something more exposed, most notably his payment of dividends out of company capital. His shares fell in price and the backlash against the railway king began. Hudson had to resign from many of his company directorships and to repay large sums of money which he was deemed to have misappropriated. On his fall from grace, in 1849, George Hudson Street in York was renamed Railway Street. But in 1971, a century after his death, the street was given back its original name. We passed through a modern arch put in the city walls to allow for easier traffic flow in 1876 and move onto Lendal Bridge, which was opened in 1861, but it collapsed and wasn't reopened until 1863. It crosses the River Ouse, York's main river, which takes its name from the Celtic or pre-Celtic Oudsos and probably means simply water or slow-flowing river. On the right, facing onto the river, is the Guild Hall. Originally, it was built in 1445 for the Guild of St. Christopher and St. George and the Corporation, but the structure you see today is mainly a modern reconstruction after the building was badly damaged during the Baedeker air raids in the Second World War. In the gardens to our left, you will find the ruins of St. Mary's Abbey, once the largest and richest Benedictine abbey in the north of England. It was pulled down by Henry VIII's men in the dissolution of the monasteries in the 1500s. Also, you will see some of the Roman fortress wall and the Multangular Tower, as well as the remains of St. Leonard's Hospital, which was closed in 1539. The hospital's main function was to care for the sick, the poor, the old, and the infirm. The garden also houses the Yorkshire Museum. This brings us into Exhibition Square. This is the nearest stop for York Minster, the Art Gallery, King's Manor, Booth and Bar, and the nicest section of the city wall, as well as the Visit York Information Centre. Thank you to anyone leaving us at this point. We hope that you have enjoyed your tour of York City Sightseeing. We hope you will join us again, here or at any of our other destinations worldwide.